Hello, and welcome back to Octorok Talk. We had a little bit of a minor hiatus there, mostly because of me. I was moving, this is Ryan Dunnigan. I was moving from Oakland to Guerneville and starting a new job, so there's that. Compile with, we actually, after a week of living here, we actually got evacuated due to a wildfire in the area. But everything's safe, but we were in evacuation for almost 2 weeks. So obviously, didn't really have time to record Old Man Orange episodes that period or do other shows or anything like that. And then after that, everything was fine and settling in, kind of getting back to, the new status quo of what we're living. And yeah, so this episode was actually recorded probably like a month and change ago, maybe even 2 months ago. But hope you like it. This isn't really a deep dive into anime. I know there's plenty of podcasts out there that do that, as well as they know the industry a lot better. So this is more of just two friends bullshitting about animes they grew up on, animes they liked little later, and it might sound a little bit of an old man, like, get off my porch, I want my Cowboy Bebops and my Dragon Ball Zs. Might come across a little bit like that to people a little bit more well seasoned in anime culture by this point, but it was just a fun conversation right here. Also, something I like to say, between recording this and recording this new intro right here, two shows I actually saw between there that I actually really liked a lot. Erased, which I know came out like a few years ago, but it's apparently by the same guy who did Sword Art Online, even though I talk a little bit of shit about Sword Art Online in this episode. Erased, I highly recommend it. Thought that show was fantastic. And another anime that I would have liked it wasn't on Netflix until points after this episode was The Great Pretender, another show I really liked, which if I saw that before we recorded this, I definitely would have liked to mention that one. But anyway, I just like to get out of the way, and yeah. Hello, and welcome to Octorok Talk. I am Ryan Dunnigan.
And I am James Artville.
And before we get started, James, you have a Inktober book that you have out on digital and print. That's right.
That's correct. So Inktober is a once a year tradition for artists of any kind. You take the month of October and once a day you make a drawing. And so I decided to compile these together and offer them for sale. And if you like anime, video games, comic books, cartoons, then you're going to like the contents of my Inktober Echoes of the Past.
Well, what's really interesting about yours in particular is it shows like a black and white drawing you did back, ranging from somewhere in elementary school, even as far as like maybe early high school. And then it shows where it's at today. So it's like you get to see the progression. So people are always kind of like you said this before. If I can take some words out of your mouth, so people see some artwork and they assume you just naturally were that good right from the get go, and you get to kind of see the progression. It's kind of interesting since we've been like best friends since the fifth grade. I've been able to see like, oh, I was there when you drew that, or I remember being in class and you showing me that drawing. So it's kind of interesting now seeing it in a printed book and seeing it like the 2.0 version.
Yeah, before and after. I love it when other artists do that too. It encourages me because it makes me realize, um, there's always room for improvement. There's always room to grow and develop. And yeah, so my intention was to offer that encouragement and inspiration for other young, inspiring artists to know that, just practice makes progress.
And you said I don't want to. I want to make sure I didn't mishear this. Maybe if I'm speaking too early, I can have this part out. But you said you have a Zelda exclusive one coming out.
Right. So Echoes of the Past was taken from 2017's Inktober. I did it again Inktober 2019, except that year was themed after The Legend of Zelda. It's not released yet. I'm hoping to put it together and maybe offer it by the end of the year. So look for that.
Can I ask you just a quick question? I know last episode was Zelda, and I don't remember if I asked you this or not. But Do you have a preference over super realistic Zelda? Oh, it's Zelda. Fuck. I did the ultimate carnal sin of calling Link Zelda. Do you prefer super cartoony Link or regular Link?
I definitely have a preference for regular Link. The
Regular
Hero of
Link.
Time is my go-to Link, but Breath of the Wild, that's definitely a close second.
The kind of they seem to do that thing where they try to meet the middle ground, like on Skyward Sword or Breath of the Wild, where it's kind of like cell shaded or kind of animation, or even like whatchamacallit, the Link to the Link to between Worlds. How that one kind of had sort of a different look, you know? How that one looked kind of like a cross between modern Link and old Link.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, The Legend of Zelda, all those games have very differing styles, but Link Between Worlds was taking aesthetically a page from A Link to the Past.
Mm-hmm. Minus
and
the
so,
pink hair.
Minus the pink hair, yeah. But if you look at the instruction booklet and the official art for Link to the Past, you can see that that's really where they're drawing their inspiration from. Mm-hmm. And that was definitely, Japanese artists, drawing those. I'd hesitate to call it anime because it wasn't animated, but it was definitely illustrated by Japanese artists. So you can definitely see that style come to play.
Yeah. And this week's episode, we're focusing on anime, and not so much like deep diving on one or two particular shows, but more talking about like, because I'll say this on our other show, Old Man Orange, we talk about anime, comes up in conversation a lot, and it's kind of one of those things. I liked it when I was a lot younger. Then I kind of had this fallout period where I just kind of pushed it away, and there's only a few I liked. And now I'm at the point where I'm like, I'm more open to, I kind of like, there's a lot of shows I like, but it's kind of hard to get me into a lot of newer ones because a lot of newer ones really aren't made for me. And, that's fine. But we're just more talking about, anime shows we grew up on, ones that stood with us, ones that kind of fell by the wayside, and maybe some ones that kind of, newer ones that we still do like. So, and maybe within that, kind of talking about, anime and culture itself, sort of. So, just kind of a little free flow thing got going there. And I think it's safe to say the show that both kind of at least caught our attention for anime was Pokemon. That was the first show, and I think that's opening for a lot of people of our generation, actually.
Yeah. I mean, Pokemon aired, was it Kids WB?
It was on, I want to say it aired on UPN and then went over to WB.
Oh, right. So these were like, I know with WB, those were channels where kids were watching Saturday morning cartoons, and a lot of these consisted of like the Looney Tunes and other like the Real Ghostbusters and other 80s cartoons. So when Pokemon came around, it was different. It looked different. The animation was different. The frame rate was different.
Why does mouse just go up and down? No, I'm not going to worry about it.
Yeah, you could say like one of the aesthetics of anime is the lower frame rate, which transitions to a choppy style. It's not as fluid as American cartoons are. But at the same time, the special effects in anime were always top notch. When there was like with Pokemon, you have your flame, your fire, your water, and your wind attacks to electricity, and those were always very impressive.
Well, something with anime I notice is they'll kind of be a lot more stilted and reserved when it comes to characters just sitting there talking and walking. But when they want to go all out in a cool action scene, that's they kind of put all their money into. And we're kind of jumping ahead here. But shows like Full Metal Alchemist, Cowboy Bebop, when they have a fight happening, that's where the animation gets a lot more fluid and a lot more kind of like a lot more smooth. I noticed because that's like, all right, here's where like here's basically the animator's guitar solo, more or less.
Good comparison. And just what came to mind too, thinking about animation in general, a lot of American 80s cartoons, actually the opening intros were animated outside the US.
Well, like Batman animated series was out animated outside the US. They always kind of like just shipped like The Simpsons, I think, were actually that may have been Korean animators for some. So that's the thing. You get people who do all the things like drawing the character designs and setting up the basic shots, and they send it over to somewhere else where it's super cheap to hire and have them do all the hard work. So yeah, that's unfortunate, just because just the idea, it's gotta suck, the idea. I mean, I'm not trying to go on a whole other topic there, but that's gotta suck to be like, like, oh my god, I love your animation style, it looks so good. Well, technically it was a guy in China.
Yeah.
Or Japan.
Well, I was thinking like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the 80s show, the opening cinema, or like X-Men, or, those opening intros, they were different than the actual show. And you can tell. And that it wasn't anime.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, it wasn't anime style. Because the studios were definitely outsourced. And I think some of them did include Japan.
It didn't have anything to the level of, like, say, you're gonna take Ninja Turtles for a second. It didn't have anything to the level of, like, Leonardo staring off into, like, the moon with rose petals flying behind him, and then a single tear drifts by and sparkles. Nothing like that. But it did have a little bit more of that zoomy, flowy, kind of dynamic feel that a lot of anime openings have. That's what they do. They have this super, like it's like, here's a tease of what you're going to get. And they'll show you some cool animation. When they show the stuff where it's just a character looking all like, deep in thought, looking at the sun, or just staring off a cliff or something like that. Like, are they going to jump? What are they going to do? And I think you could, maybe if you wouldn't think anything looking at it, like looking at the Ninja Turtles opening, but just thinking about how it cuts the different characters, how it's like zooming through them, they're jumping into the camera and stuff, that very kind of shonen-esque style, which you probably wouldn't think of it unless you're like, oh yeah, I guess it is kind of Japanese, other than they're ninjas.
Yeah, and that's one of those things too. Like Japanese anime, they're fighting the fight scenes. The camera is just all over the place. It's so dynamic. It moves with you, with the action, and that is just amazing. It's so engaging. It's so fun to watch. And the opposite of that would be like Batman the Animated Series. Wonderful show. I love it to death. But a lot of those fight scenes are just like you're watching a stage, and there's the actors, and they're just throwing punches, and it's very basic and bland. And just comparison, it's very different. It's a very different approach to fight scenes and how they're choreographed.
The animation is very beautiful and very fluid, but the camera often stays fixed. Kind of like an old, well, I guess it makes sense because the Batman animated series pulls a lot from retro cinema, thus the Art Deco architecture and that kind of 1930s, 40s aesthetic it kind of has. So a lot of times it kind of stays fixated on one character, even though the animation is incredibly fluid, and that's what's really smart about that. We'll actually get back to anime here in a second, but that was something smart about that. They knew let's keep the characters looking basic enough so there's not a bunch of detail, but it's going to be really smooth and it's going to fit artistically with everything else around there,
Mm-hmm. And also too, the consistency. Those characters, you're not going to see things like exaggerated expressions. You're not going to have a fist enlarged in front of the camera to a ridiculous proportion to get that effect that like it's really coming at you. The characters, their proportions, and their anatomy stays intact throughout the fight scene. Whereas like with anime, you're going to have that stretch and squash principle. You're going to have speed lines, you're going to have the character dissolve and blur because they're moving so fast. And yeah, so that's one of the reasons that I love anime, is because it really embraces the motion and the effect, where the drawings themselves, if you were to pause like a single moment during a fight scene in anime, the characters are going to look warped. They're going to look distorted and weird. And yeah, it's gonna look strange, but if you view it continuously, it's gonna have that really cool effect.
Mm-hmm. That's the thing about it, where they even kind of do the thing where it sometimes has that fake shaky cam, because Cowboy Bebop, to bring that up once again, would do that thing where like the characters are kind of staggering a little bit, and there looks like somebody probably rotoscoped a little bit of like somebody trying to do like the best Bruce Lee impersonation, and then they'd also have the camera being a little like it's trying to keep up with them. So you have that a little bit. Now there are those ones like I'm going to say we're going to go back to. Pokemon had some more of the dynamic things, but it had the thing where it just be the blurring background and the character just quickly moves over here, then a lightning bolt, they quickly move over there, something to that effect. But that was, I'm going to say, not my first introduction anime, but the first thing that kind of got me into it. Because it was like, I remember Toonami, I remember watching Voltron and liking it, and, not really, like, knowing the difference at the time. Like, oh, that's anime? Okay. And, Speed Racer, be like, why do they talk so funny? Be like, oh, okay, they probably, it was... They still didn't know what this thing was. They looked at how much information they had to say, and like, all right, we got 2 takes. Talk now. Talk really fast. Here's some cocaine, and then you have like, say, by at this point you get to like, Pokemon, and the thing that ultimately made me turn that on. I remember seeing the ads for the show for UPN and be like, that show looks so weird, but I know it's based on a video game, and it's a video game by Nintendo, so by that right there, I automatically have to at least see what this thing's about. And I remember catching it for the first time on the 3rd episode, because I didn't really know anything about it. Just from looking at from looking at that ad, I assumed that there's like Pokemon were like aliens or something. There's good ones and bad ones. These kids are helping them out. That's what I just assumed going off the ad. I'm like, oh, it's kind of like this. So I was able to put together, it probably plays like an RPG then. This is the concept. And then, sure enough, that quickly at the time became one of my favorite shows. Now to this day, the show doesn't hold up as well. I still like the franchise just as a video game, and on the other podcasts we've been doing the Pokemon Adventures manga, which is actually surprisingly well written and gets a little darker than you expect it to at times. And so there is, good ways to tell a narrative story for that. But remember, that was the first anime I got into, really. And was that the first one you were into, or were there ones before it?
Well, yeah, that was the first one that I would say that I became really obsessive about, and I started drawing a lot of fan art for. I was technically introduced to anime before that, but I really didn't. It didn't really click in my mind the difference between anime or Japanese anime and any other form of cartoon or animation. You see, when I was a kid, visit my family in Mexico during the summer and winter breaks, and in Mexico, Japanese anime had been around and popular long before it blew up in the United States. So for me, watching these shows, in Spanish, it really didn't dawn on me the country of origin. I could have just as easily assumed that these were, it's Mexican animation instead of Japanese. But so for instance, Dragon Ball, I would say was my first introduction to anime. I was watching Dragon Ball GT before the U.S. was even showing the entirety of the Frieza saga.
I remember Pokemon and Dragon Ball Z are probably 2 things that we both bonded over. And Dragon Ball Z was one I wasn't into immediately just because I looked at it and I was like, this thing looks too intense. It looks tú serious. Like you look at the toys, nobody is smiling. And then I remember because I at the time collected Star Wars toys, and it came with these little booklets. I want to say of other products that toy company came out with, and I want to say they had something in there for Dragon Ball Z or Dragon Ball toys. And I remember looking at like, oh man, this looks like it's for like tougher kids than me. And like I one day just decided to check it out, and it was the episode where Vegeta turns into an Azaru, and Yajirobe has to cut his tail off, and at some point he grabs Goku, squeezes him, almost breaks every bone in his body, steps on his legs, and I'm like, holy shit, this show's intense, the end of the world's at stake. This is so much different from like Captain Planet. There they just all like shoot like heart, fire, whatever, but this people could die here. Whoa, and then sure enough, I got into it, and because it was you, me, and then our other friend Amir who was really into it, and I think he kind of got us more into Dragon Ball Z just from hanging out with him, and we got him a little bit into Pokemon. And the only thing is though, Pokemon, my love for that series, even though I remember it super well, my interest in the series was very fleeting. It was like 2 years. I remember it super well, but I'm not into it like I used to be. But I still like that franchise and the video games. Um, I remember that we also had this one friend that lived across the street from you, who is we mentioned this guy before on this show. We mentioned him on Old Man Orange. He's basically that older guy who would introduce the older guy by is like 2 or 3 years older, and he would introduce you to anime and shows that your parents probably wouldn't want you to watch, but he was kind of the bad influence. Remember, he would make up lots of different rumors about Pokemon and other things about it. You know?
Yeah. He was 15. We were 11 at the
11 or
time.
12, yeah.
11 or 12, and he was our sensei. He was the one to teach us and to instruct us in the ways of all things video games and anime. He was the authority figure, and who were we to question his wisdom? He would travel, to his family and visit in the Philippines, which as a kid was just as good as Japan because I didn't know my geography.
It's next door. It's a rocks. It's a stone's toss away.
Yeah, so of course he had all the insider information, and we just ate it all up. And of course we believed absolutely everything he had to say, which looking back, I think he was just trying to impress us, which is kind of funny now and a little sad considering that he was so much older. What need does he have to impress a bunch of, preteens?
Yeah. Well, at the same time, it was also like we could dissect that part all day. I remember some of the things he would come up with for it, which was sad thing is there was like a little speckle of truth. Maybe there's a little speckle of truth, but then he would just, he'd take that and then just alter it and just run with it like he's Forrest Gump. Like it would be something to the effect of like Pokemon's a little like in Japan. There's some things they had to censor out, which they did, but he brought it up to a crazy level. I remember this was more than just San Jose, which we were at the time. Remember, there's a rumor that in the Pokemon movie, when Ash is like, "No, everybody, stop fighting!" he runs out there and gets blasted. His version was he got blasted and his head got blown off, and he flops to the ground. That was the version he said. And then, like, you see the movie, and you're like, well, they probably just had to edit around that. Like, that's a lot to edit around, so...
I think the script says something along the lines of, and then Ash falls to the ground, lifeless. And then, you take that, and he interprets it. It's like, oh, well, Ash is dead. Well, that's not good enough. So if he's dead, it's gotta be brutal.
Well, then there's Pokemon 2000, the movie. Remember, he was telling me, like, he was right that the movie's about... Before that movie even came out, before there was even a trailer for it, he was right. That movie was about the 3 legendary birds. And the legendary birds have gone AWOL and started attacking everything. He was right about that. He wasn't right that Misty dies while trying to give Ash... Like, Ash is underwater. She gives him breath, like, mouth to mouth. She dies saving him, and then he has to like make a deal with Ho-Ho or Lugia or something to bring her back to life or something like that. Which that's not a bad plot point, but at the same time, I was in the movie just waiting for that to happen. Like, that never happened. What? And then there's another part where he was saying, because there's a part, you see the birds attacking people. He says there's a part where there's like some spring breakers on a boat. And then they all get brutally killed by, like, Zapdos. Like, Zapdos, like, impales some lady, splits her in half. Like, this total kind of, like, Wicked City Ninja Scroll, like, murder scene. And thinking back, like, he just, like, his rationale was, well, technically, like, their PG is, like, RR. I'm like, that's a big jump. I think that's a big jump right there.
Yeah. I think he was trying to justify his fandom for a series that appealed to a younger audience than he was. So in his mind, he had to make it cooler. He had to make it more intense.
I think you're right. I think he had to go and say, like, well, yeah, in America it's okay, but in the Japanese version, like, Misty and Brock end up having, like, a sex scene that lasts the whole episode. Like, really? Yeah, that's what they do. That's Saturday mornings in Japan.
But we were basically fed. We're just verbal fan fictions.
Yeah, at the end of the day. But you know what? That kind of made us kind of just that didn't scare us off from watching it, but we were just thinking there was a little bit like, is this true? Can this be true? Then you look into it, like 10% of it's maybe true, maybe 10%, but it was still one of those things that it was internet was there, but it wasn't like super common. Not everyone had dial up, you know.
Yeah, and things like forums and news sites, that information wasn't easily accessible, especially not for fans to group together and share their knowledge and disprove these theories. So everybody could have been right, everybody could have been wrong. We had no way of proving any of it.
And the way in was basically Pokemon and then Dragon Ball Z. And then this guy, we're talking this shit on him now, but he did introduce us to other things, which some of that stuff lasted, some of it didn't. But, he would also feed us stuff about Dragon Ball Z, like how eventually everyone in Dragon Ball Z dies brutally and horribly, and then you watch, like, no, they don't. But, they do in the Japanese version, but, Regardless of that, he would be the guy who would show us other things. Like, he showed us Ninja Scroll and Samurai X when we were probably, like, 11. And then we move on to, like, he showed us things that are more that middle ground, like Tenchi Muyo, Kenshin, Evangelion, and some of that stuff has stuck with me, and some of that stuff hasn't, and some of it's like, I like it, I see its flaws, but I still like it. Like, I don't see myself going out and buying the box set to any Tenchi series, but I remember that being, like, when it comes to Harem series, that's one of the few ones where I remember it being better than a lot of other harem stuff. Because a lot of other harem stuff, it just seems to be some, like, hapless dork who can't do anything right. But for some reason, these girls just all immediately like him, even though he just always has this dopey look like, what? They like me, duh, And Tenchi was one where, yeah, it had a little bit of that, but it felt more like at least all the characters in that had their own distinct personalities.
Yeah, and it was manageable. It was less than a dozen girls. Once you hit 30 or more, it's ridiculous.
It was like you had the two that like fought over him, the little sister, the two cops, and then the
mad scientist.
Mad scientist. And the only two that were really serious about it were like the two always fighting over him, the pirates and the princess. And everybody else was more of like, oh, he's cute, but doesn't have to happen, And I think that worked because they all kind of have their own thing going on. It was basically, if I had to guess, I mean, I don't really remember it super well. I remember certain things, but it was like this whole thing of, I think it was doing kind of like maybe the Thor thing, maybe. I could be wrong here, but I'm guessing they're doing the science fiction version of Japanese lore and mythology. I might be totally wrong there, but I remember a lot of the alien stuff still had this kind of Japanese kind of design to it. So it wouldn't surprise me the least bit if doing a deep dive that they're just kind of like, oh, and Thor, they're not just gods, they're aliens, but we thought it was magic was actually high-tech technology. So I can see that being the case with Tenchi. I don't know if that is the case, but I can see it being something kind of like that.
I remember being confused when there were several Tenchi series. There was the Tenchi Muyo, there was Tenchi in Tokyo, there was Tenchi in space, and
Tenchi Universe.
Tenchi Universe. It always bothered me because I wanted continuity, but I think these series were just separate. I don't think they were supposed to be sequels or connected in any way.
I don't think they were connected. I think it was just this idea of like, here's the same cast of characters. We're gonna tweak it and have some fun.
Yeah, and that bothered me. I wanted continuity. I was like, why are they not acknowledging the fact that, wait, Ryoku, is she a space pirate? Is she a demon? What is it? I was so confused, watching it as a teenager.
Well, also thinking back on it, this is one of those cases where they started bringing a lot of these types of shows to Toonami, and I think that's what a lot of this list is probably going to be. But something like Tenchi, what's the concept? It's a guy who's kind of hapless, and for some reason he's the chosen one, and he's surrounded by a bunch of ladies who want to lay him. That's kind of like, they all want to fuck. That's essentially what's happening at the end of the day. And he's just like, well, I don't know what to do, So, I mean, it's kind of like science fiction version of Archie when you think about it. But at the end of the day, a science fiction Japanese version of Archie. So, but at the end of the day, it's just like, how does that get into a kids network? Because there's still like they had to edit out a lot of nudity. Violence wasn't too bad, probably enough to like well let's make that mud instead of blood. We'll just change the contrast or make it green or something.
Yeah, they had to superimpose bathing suits on all the girls in every single outdoor spring bath scene. And believe me, there were a lot of those. I mean, yeah, that was like the premise of the series.
I wonder if they had any crunch time for that. Like, dude, you really got me. I know it's Christmas, but we really got to get this thing out by February. So I need you to do an all-nighter and superimpose swims. Can we just give them all one pieces? It makes so much easier. Well, they want to distinguish it between. They want to stay true to the idea of the original series. It's on a freaking kids network, dude.
Yeah. That was an odd one.
Can we just edit around this whole scene? No, sorry. There's crucial information in this about how he's the chosen one or some shit.
Yeah, I think language is probably also censored as well, especially
they did swear. They said bitch a lot. I remember.
Oh yeah, I guess that was
which in Toonami was witch.
Of course, other shows I remember like Big O. I remember watching that one, and then there was Outlaw Star. Cowboy Bebop.
So the thing
Gundam.
Gundam was a big one for me. Gundam Wing was a big one for me. And that one, like, oh my god, they're bringing politics into it. This is so serious. This is so mature. Try to show that to your parents. Look, I know there's fighting robots, but they're talking about space politics. Earth does not like the colonies. Like, all right, that's great, kid. All right, But I remember Outlaw Star being one that I full on fell in love with, just because it was kind of like another Star Wars type universe. It went at the beginning of each episode, went out of its way to explain, here's what we're focusing on in this episode, and this is like, oh look, different alien species, different alien religions, this and that. It always had a little bit of an explanation at the beginning, and it kind of gave you this bigger sense of a universe, which is too bad that it only had that spin-off show, which I never saw. And another other season or movie, which they were talking about, never happened. But that was one that I full-on fell in love with when I first saw it. And that's another show where it feels weird they brought that to... Like, it's not surprising that comes to Adult Swim. It is a little hard to bring to Toonami, just looking at it. Like, once again, like, not a whole bunch of nudity, but more than you'd think. Enough to have to do some editing around it, put Melfina in a swimsuit or whatever, and then take out blood, and then once again, language.
There was a lot of movies like in the early 90s that featured nudity and still carried a PG rating. I mean, there were comedies like Airplane and Naked Gun, and then there was like Tom Hanks' Big, and then there was like Splash. Those were, I think, rated PG and featured nudity.
The thing about those is I want to say that was before a PG-13 rating came around, and I think the main movie, I might be wrong here, I think the main movie that pushed for PG-13 was Raiders of the Lost Ark. Because, tonally and the vibe, this is kind of for, parents and kids to go see, but we're melting Nazis at the end. That might be a bit much. Maybe we need something more than just a PG. And that's where PG-13 came in, so that's why a bunch of old action movies and old bomb movies, which seems like they might possibly be just slightly PG-13, almost are, that's why a lot of those are PG.
Yeah. The whole, nudity and themes of sexuality in the West, it's kind of a hit or miss. Different networks have different standards. And of like Nickelodeon, is going to be different than like Cartoon Network, or the WB. And like Cartoon Network now with like Adult Swim, when that came around, that was a perfect place to show, the uncut and uncensored versions of those anime shows. It was fine. It was made much more sense than Toonami, like we mentioned before. And like Dragon Ball, I mean, like a lot of Dragon Ball content, was heavily censored, and then they released Kai, I believe, Dragon Ball Z Kai, which was more accurate to the manga. And I don't remember if it was if they showed. I think they did show more blood, or it might be the other way around. I could be completely wrong there.
Probably depending on the version. I remember, did Kai, was that strictly an American thing, or did they do that in Japan too?
I don't know.
Yeah. I can see it being kind of going either way, just the condensed version. I do like because there's a lot of that dumb filler stuff, but some of that filler stuff was like sometimes could be entertaining, and I was kind of glad they put it in there. But it's case by case. Like the filler stuff where they're staying in the same like 10 foot radius for like a whole season. That part got a little old. But as far as some of the other stuff, like I remember it was actually it was like a Team 4-star bit where they were going after the Dragon Balls the whole time, and they just like, man, I wonder what Bulma's been up to. Then an abrupt crab battle, gonna have a crab battle. She's like underwater in that like pond thing, fighting a giant crab for the Dragon Ball.
Yeah. Yeah. Team 4-star does a good job of poking fun of those moments.
Yeah, she's probably doing nothing. Crab battle, crab battle. but I remember that Outlaw Star was one of the first shows. I'm gonna say like as far as like there's a period where I kind of fell off Dragon Ball Z because like oh it's so cheesy and this and that, but it was more me just kind of succumbing to peer pressure because eventually I moved to Sonora, a small little redneck town. I love it there, but then again you also got people who's like you don't throw a football, get the fuck out of my face. You had some of that going on, so out of that you kind of like wouldn't announce you like anime that much, but eventually it's like you know what I don't care what these guys think. Dragon Ball Z is still cool.
Yeah, we're kind of that generation, the early adopters of anime. I mean, in the States, anime I would say maybe premiered with shows like Astro Boy and Speed Racer, and our parents probably remember watching those. But then it kind of fell to the wayside, and there were a few shows that came out in the 80s, like Voltron, and some magical samurai warrior show. I forgot what it was called, but you know, thanks to Toonami, you know, and you know our generation really being introduced with that, and of course, you know, Pokemon, Digimon, Monster Rancher, you know, and all those Saturday morning anime cartoons. You know, they sold the crap out of merchandise, you know, video games and toys, and suddenly anime became profitable, and then it started to become more mainstream, but still like. Even in our high school years, there was a bit of this stigma that, you know, liking anime was a careful thing because, you know, some people just viewed it as cartoons, you know, cartoons, you know, well, why aren't you watching MTV? You know, why aren't you watching VH1? It's like, oh no, we like anime, you know, but I think thanks to Netflix, I think, you know, and Crunchyroll, and YouTube, you know, anime now is definitely becoming more socially acceptable, recognizing that, hey, you know, we got some really good storytelling here. You know, it's some of the, you know, like One Punch Man, you know, is the most recent one that I've watched. And it blew up. I mean, I think it was only 2 or 3 years ago it came out. And it just, it grew in popularity really, really quickly.
That's one that I've seen a little bit of, and I like it. I just need to pick it back up and finish it. I remember even you showed me, and it does a lot of the shonen tropes. Like there's the one guy, what's Supersonic something? What's his name?
Yeah, Supersonic. Yeah.
There's a part because he's always talking like he's so like hot shit, and he's trying to stop somebody. He's like ha 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 ha. And I remember there's a part where he just gets lightly punched by Tasama. What's his name? Tasama or Kasama?
Saitama.
Saitama gets lightly punched, and it's not even like you don't even see like they don't even edit like the clip of him falling down. Just a light punch, and then just next thing an explosion into the ground. Like there's like no transition, like that quick. Like it's a lot of the things like that, like small details like that, which really help that show. And it's a show that I'd like to pick back up. I remember I just put it to the side. And they would even do the thing because in a lot of anime, there's always that grandstanding moment. The character who's all saying, "You cannot stop us." And they make a big deal, like, "Here's my team of 7 elite killers." And then he just walks in the room, just annihilates them very easily. So it's just one of those things where it actually is, it just... I mean, I know by this point, anime has made fun of itself, but I feel like that one does a good job of it, you know?
Yeah, and it's also I mean, it's a satire, it's a parody, but it also embraces and celebrates its source material. You know, it's the superhero genre, you know, American superhero as well as, you know, Japanese tropes in storytelling. You know, the shonen thing. You know, it's all there, and that's probably one of the reasons I love it so much.
There's like those ones where they're kind of coming out at a different angle. Like I didn't finish the series. I saw like 3 or 4 episodes, and apparently it ends abruptly, but it might be getting another season. There's one called Panty and Stocking, and it's like hard to be like some of these shows are just hard to pitch to people, you know? And essentially they're like angels that have to go and fight criminals and demons, but it has this weird kind of sort of anime kind of simplified version. And the guy who gives them their jobs is like a priest who's basically meant to be Samuel Jackson from Pulp Fiction, more or less, of the way he looks and sounds and talks. And it's this whole kind of parody on magical girl slash stuff, but it's also in some ways meant to be kind of like we're making fun of the way Americans see Japanese culture. Like apparently the creators of that show loved the show Drawn Together. They thought Drawn Together was hilarious, and they thought the whole bit with there's the Pikachu parody of that show, and they thought that it was so funny. That's how Americans saw Japanese culture. So the whole theme of the show is we're gonna make fun of the way Americans kind of see everything over here.
It comes full circle there.
Yeah, so it's a parody of a parody of a parody, which works in some way. And I mean, I only saw like the first 3 or 4 episodes, and what I saw, I liked, but it was also very immature. But I think as long as it's aware, it's that. I think that's the thing about anime, though. Sometimes you would have like, I think anime from when we were growing up was something where here is like a story that takes itself more serious. It's really dramatic, and sometimes that really helps, but sometimes it feels very melodramatic and out of nowhere, and it just seems kind of cheesy. And I think that's just sometimes just the language barrier, because that's the reason why when people try to translate it word for word, it comes off kind of clunky, because Japanese narratives a lot of times that stem from, I think, kabuki theater. This is me, I did not do any research in this. This is just me literally saying something I heard someone else say, and hopefully they're right. But apparently a lot of Japanese acting stems from kabuki theater, and a lot of that is more of saying what you think and giving a lot of exposition rather than giving nuances.
A lot of telling instead of showing.
Yeah, which is always kind of a problem with anime for me, but that's just the East versus West storytelling thing.
Yeah, a good example of that would be announcing the name of your attack right before you use it.
Oh, very much so. Very much so. I wonder if they did that in old kabuki theater, you know? Solar flare, yeah. Well, no, I'm not at the point where I'm like, and I was a kid, when I was younger, I would be like, why are they doing that? Why are they doing that? But now if it's Street Fighter or something, like, no, I get it, you know? So it varies from case to case. But I think that there are those ones that were trying to be so dark and grim that I liked them when I was younger, but now I just kind of roll my eyes at it. Like, one that I liked when I was younger was Soul Taker. But you also got to keep in mind that there is this period where Amazon wasn't super readily available, and I lived in a town where you didn't have a whole lot of options. So we go to Modesto. My friend and I, Spencer, we go to Modesto, and we would stock up on like anime, westerns, and kung fu movies, at like a Suncoast or an FYE or something like that. And there'd be an anime you just see something of. It'd be like $30 always, and you'd have a few episodes, and you look at it, and you have to make that choice right there. Like, well, this might be good or this might be bad, and you have to roll those dice, and you gotta hope that you just liked the rest of the series as it came along, you know? Yeah. You already made that commitment, and Soul Taker was one of those for me, because I just thought it looked cool, and then I watched it, and then I liked it at the time, but as it went on, it just became a little melodramatic and weird choices, as far as like they try to make drama out of something, but it'd be in the stupidest way. Like, it's eventually short and simple of it, the dude's trying to find his sister. He's trying to find his sister, and when he's stabbed in the heart, he can turn into this monster. And at the end of it, the sister's like, I want to destroy the world. And then he's like, what are you going to do? Are you going to let her destroy the world? Or are you going to kill this girl? Both are unforgivable acts. I'm like, well, she wants to destroy the world. I'm just putting that out there. She wants to destroy the world, and she wants to bang her brother. I think there's kind of, like, how could you kill your sister? You also can't let her destroy the world. Like, yeah, I know, but why are these the only two options? So they kind of like would force a lot of like these weird bits of drama. And the dad, like, the kid got infected with this disease at a long time ago, and the dad hated the kid for it. And like, look what you did. You're this abomination after this disease we try to create a cure for, and this and that. Like, you gave me the disease, asshole. So there's a lot of times those things they would just try to crowbar drama in there, but when you stop and think about it, like, it didn't make a lot of sense. And Soul Taker is one that comes to mind, but there are other ones that would have some of that same thing too.
Yeah, when it comes to storytelling, a lot of anime suffer from that lack of common sense. I think the stories are pre-written, usually in the form of manga. Mm-hmm. And the actions are justifiable based on the results, regardless of whether they made sense at the time or not. There's always that end game that everything has to happen, and however they get there, that's what happens. And so, sometimes it doesn't feel organic, it doesn't feel believable. And when watching anime, you have to, suspension of disbelief. You just have to roll with it. You can pick it apart, you can try to rationalize it, make sense of it, and you'll fail every time.
Yeah, there's ones that, like, maybe it's a little melodramatic, but it was still good overall, like something like Full Metal Alchemist. Like, there's that period where I kind of started to step out of anime that I came back, like, the ones like only like Cowboy Bebop and Evangelion. Even Evangelion is one of the ones where there's some things where it's a little kind of bloated and kind of up its own ass, but there's still some good stuff there and some interesting concepts overall, and I still like that series, even though it's awkward now. Like, oh, they're all supposed to be like 15? Okay. Ooh.
But it was supposed to be psychological. It was supposed to make you think. It was supposed to, it's one of those shows where after you watch it, you're still thinking about it days and weeks afterwards.
And they're still selling action figures of Asuka in a bikini. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. But regardless, then again, that show started a lot of the tropes, kind of like the whole, here's the angry, fiery girl, here's the girl who's very competent but lacks emotion, here's the self-hating
Bumbling
character that's made to like kind of like insert yourself into.
Yeah, there's also one of those shows too where it had a bit of an identity crisis. At some points, it was like, like a shonen. At some points, it was like a harem. And then at others, it was, like a just, apocalyptic.
Stanley Kubrick, yeah.
Yeah. Everyone dies in the end. It's like, all hope is gone. Yeah, it's...
That was one of the first shows that the guy who lived across the street from you, he got me into, and that one stuck with me for a while. A lot of these are shows that eventually came on like Toonami or Adult Swim, but I can honestly say Tenchi, Evangelion, and Kenshin were ones that I was already kind of like aware of and into. That's one where I felt like a little bit of a hipster. Like, oh, I already know about these. And I didn't know in the Japanese version that they all like get into like a three-way. How do you know that? My friend told me, but which was not true. But then there's something where Evangelion, now I was just making a general reference, but that'd be awkward if a three-way happened in that show. But that show was one where it's like, you're right, this started off with an identity crisis, but that's because I'm not sure if it's because the guy went through depression halfway through making the show, or if he just wanted to catch people off guard, because that's something that happened. It is, because it does start off as being a little bleaker and a little gloomier, but it has more of a reason of how the city works. Like, it's not just like, okay, it looks like we're having another, like, this place is known for having monsters attack, or angels. So it's almost like, okay, so these buildings go underground. This building is made strictly to shoot a gun up to them, and you see a little bit more of the fine details. Like, oh, we see like trucks going out and picking up giant like shells from bullets. So it has a little bit more of that, which was interesting. Like this idea of this world catered to kaiju fighting.
Yeah, well, kaiju, that's definitely a Japanese thing. What's interesting about Evangelion too is the fact that, unlike most anime, it wasn't based off of a manga. It really was an anime original, and the manga adaptation came years after.
Yeah, and that manga, that's interesting because the manga starts off like it's following fairly close, but things happen a little bit differently. And then as it gets closer, I hopped off the manga about like volume 6. I mean, because there's like I was reading it and I was like, things happen a little differently, but it's mostly the same. But regardless, I hopped off around volume 6. But apparently, as it goes on from that point, it really starts to differ and kind of mix match different things. And it does something way different at the very last volume. They win. The world doesn't end. They stop it. And the angels or the Avas that kind of impale themselves and all die and floating around in space at the end of Evangelion all come back to Earth. Like those are relics of a forgotten time. So it's like, oh, okay, so this is kind of like just this loop, this kind of like snake eating its own tail kind of thing.
Yeah, and I think it's a very common theme in a lot of anime shows. This idea of apocalyptic end of world, but the glimmer of hope in the end is that there's a rebirth or a second attempt, if you will, almost have you seen Donnie Darko?
I have, yeah.
Kind of reminds me of that, where there's like this cycle, this perpetual loop of events until something breaks it, and then you get the true ending. It reminds me of that, and like Xenoblade Chronicles deals with that too. This being like a end of the world rebirth thing, having to rise up against creation, your creator, the god, the deity, what have you, and in the end, epic battle, everything gets destroyed, but then there's a glimmer of hope that everything is reborn. But the second time around, it's different enough that it's hopeful, and that's the true ending.
Well, that's even the thing with Wolf's Rain, because Wolf's Rain was one where what initially caught my eye about that was it was like, oh, from the writer of Cowboy Bebop. I'm like, all right, cool. That's one of my favorite shows right now, so I'll definitely check that out. And it is post-apocalyptic, and as you're watching it, it kind of ends on this note of like, all the humans are going to die, and only wolves are going to go to the supposed paradise or whatever. And as the show goes on, like everyone kind of finally, because you have all these different stories. There's the wolves, and then there's a couple other human characters, and eventually everyone sort of comes together in like this cluster at the end. But one by one, people start getting picked off, and within the last like 5 or 6 episodes. And when you get to the end, it ends on this note of the end of the world does happen, everyone does die, but then it gets kind of reborn in some way,
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Both Xenoblade games are kind of like that. The idea of a death of the old world, of the old way of doing things, where the world has to burn, and out of the ashes rises the phoenix, the new world, the new, better life.
Which I think that's very much a I don't want to generalize, but I feel like that's much more of an Eastern thought process, kind of like where a Western thought process is like, no one's taking me down. I'll be Mad Maxing through the wastelands if I have to. Where this is more of like, no, go with grace, go with just accept it. Is kind of like almost how a lot of, because even in Evangelion, I mean, I don't know. We got to see whenever this new movie finally comes out, if it ever does. We got to see how that one ends. But Tenchi screws up in the end of Evangelion. It's him screaming and losing his mind and having a mental breakdown for half the movie. And before then, he's just like, I don't want to get you. It gets irritating to the level of like, you just want to see, you just like, dude, just shut up and fly the robot, And then it kind of ends on this note, while the world is ending, it actually has this grand arcing music. Almost sounds like something out of an Alan Silvestri score. It's all epic and grand, and it's not presented as the worst thing.
Yeah. I think the underlying tone there has to do with fate. or destiny. And so like in the West, a lot of our shows and movies and stories, think of just time travel, right? The idea of, fate is what you make of it. The future is not set in stone. You are in control of your destiny. That is the way that a lot of Western stories are told. Either that, or like when talking about time travel, you try to change fate, but you end up causing it, and then that's where you have this endless loop of predestination or self-fulfilling prophecy, what have you. But in Japanese culture too, a lot of those animes, like Xenoblade, or Evangelion, they're trying to fight the inevitable. They're trying to fight against what is supposed to happen, prophecy, what have you. But like you mentioned, there's a point where maybe they just accept it with grace, and maybe in the accepting of it, instead of the fighting against it, is the thing that breaks it. It's a, kind of, an oxymoron, if you will.
Well, I guess the only thing about Evangelion is because it's a bunch of crooked old Illuminati guys who want to put everyone through the work of, we're going to stop the angels from destroying everything, but then we're going to make the active choice to end it ourselves because us 7 guys in the room should be the ones that make that decision. And it's just one of those things where I think that's the thing that's kind of really infuriating about it, is you hate Sele so much, and these Metal Gear Solid Illuminati looking assholes are the ones trying to like steer it. You go through all the trouble to try and stop the end of the world, and then they decide to do it themselves. And I think that's the thing that ultimately leaves it a little unbalanced. Like, wait, so are these guys right or are they wrong? Because you don't present them as likable characters for the longest time, but maybe they're trying to twist it in their own way of how they want to do it. But who knows? Maybe Hideaki Anno has a different thought process by this point, and that's why he's making this remake. He's like, you know what? I was wrong back in '97. Here's what I really think now.
Good for him.
Maybe. Who knows? Who knows? Because it just becomes this thing. Like, it's just all repeating itself. There's different versions. Like, each version is apparently a different cycle. Apparently, but going off from Evangelion, because that was a very big one for me. I think that was a big one for you. My most favorite show probably is Cowboy Bebop. And I think when I was younger, and I think the reason I watched that one in the first place is I was looking for something to fill that hole for Outlaw Star. And I remember I initially hated Big O because Outlaw Star came out and it ran for 1 season, and I missed the last episode. And like, all right, well, I'll just start rewatching it again when they start the replay of it. And Big O was on instead. It's like, I hate Big O. I replaced Outlaw Star, And now looking back, it's an interesting concept. The idea of like a 1930s, 1940s kaiju battle series is an interesting concept. Maybe I got to go back and check it. I don't know if it's any good. But at the time, I hated it. And then eventually Outlaw Star came back on and I saw it. But from there, I wanted to fill that void of my sci-fi Western. And that's when shortly around that time, they started playing Adult Swim. And Cowboy Bebop was on that.
Yeah, I remember Cowboy Bebop was very influential. For you, your stories, your characters, and your creative work, and you fell in love with that tone, that jazzy aesthetic, and the variety of the characters and how they're all so different. They all come from different walks of life, and yet there's this harmonious synchronization when they work together, even if they don't even like each other. There's this thing underlying that's tying them together, and there's this loyalty that they have with each other, and it's fun to watch.
The thing about that show, and we did a whole episode where we covered the whole series and the movie on Old Man Orange, but the thing about Cowboy Bebop is I think I like it because I love anime art style, I love the look, I love the vibe it gives off. But narrative, I guess it's more than... I love the technical aspect. If there's a problem with it, it's sometimes the narrative choices and the over-explaining. And Bebop, being an anime, inherently has some of that, but not to the level of other things. And there's a lot more that's implied and not spoken. And like a lot of the things they do in that show, it's like small, like how do I put it? Like they don't even really like each other that much, but there's this sense of loyalty because they realize they're all they have. And I think one of the most, some people might say you're making a bigger thing out of nothing, but this to me is probably one of the most like touching moments in the series, or most, or at least says the most about this character's dynamic. There's the middle of the series where Spike leaves the group to go find Julia on I forget the name of the planet, but it's this snow-ridden planet with nothing there, and he leaves at a time when Jet needs his help, and he says, "If you're leaving, you're fucking gone." And then like Spike just pauses, like, "You do what you got to do," and just leaves. And then later, he's saying there's happens to be a bounty there, and the bounty kind of has history with his ex-girlfriend and his archenemy Vicious, this and that, and he does the honorable thing, and he says like, "Look, I just want to die on this planet where I had this war, because in my mind I never really left. So if you can just send me there, if I'm at least getting there, I'll be happy." So he could just bring in the body, but instead he does the honorable thing and lets him go off. And then he's going back to Jet, and he's saying, earlier Jet said, if you want back on the ship, you got to bring him in. He says, "Are you carrying anything in?" He's like, "No, nothing at all." And then it cuts to Jet just looking like, "All right, we leave in 5 minutes. Hurry up." Like it's kind of like he has no one else. They have nowhere else to go. Nobody has nowhere else to go, and this is the only place they have. And that right there is more than is like enough for them to get by for the next day.
Yeah. There's a moment there where it's almost like a power struggle, right? It's a battle of the pride. Jet has
they called each other on their own bullshit.
Yeah, and who was gonna move first? There had to be a compromise somewhere. But in the end, it really wasn't worth the struggle of trying to, be the bigger man. So just swallowing your pride and get back on the ship. We leave in 5.
And if Spike left, Spike wouldn't have probably argued to be why he should stay on the ship. Like, okay, I guess I got to start over again. But Jet was also like, what's going to be the difference? It's just going to happen again at some point. Yeah, get on the ship, and not in this settle kind of attitude, kind of like, hey kids, just settle. But there's also this sense of being realistic and kind of knowing who else is going to take you in. And this is like probably one of the only guys who's going to look out for you the way he does.
Yeah. And by the end of the show, like it may be unspoken, it may be unsaid, but they, with the time they spend together and the loyalty they have for one another, they extend grace to each other, but they do it in a subtle way. They're not going to make a big show about it, because they got to save face.
Well, on top of that, there's also the whole thing where Faye even comes in. Like, there's the episode where Ed leaves, and they have that montage of that song playing, that sad song, call me, something like that. And they realize, Ed's always just been kind of the loud, annoying kid on the ship. He's like, well, she's good at hacking, so all right, whatever. And then she's gone. And then, she just gives Spike the little, like, windmill thing she got in that episode. And then, they finally got a bunch of food. That whole episode, they've been looking for food. And then, like, Jet's like, hey, man, we got some food ready for you. And then, like, Spike's just looking out the window, saying she wrote bye-bye with her signature smiley face on the deck. And like, oh, okay. And they're not saying anything. They're just eating. But they have way more food than they ever had before. And they're just gouging themselves, not talking, just eating even faster. And not in a comical way. And at the very end of the episode, you see they tied the little windmill thing to the front of the ship. And it's one of those things of like, I'm assuming that was Spike, because he was the one that was handed it. And he was, so these people who act like they don't care, it's just because it's their job and they got to move on to the next thing. And it's kind of like about how this world can like grind them down and beat them down, but over time they stick together because that's all they really have.
Yeah, and one of those lessons of you don't realize what you have till it's gone. And then also just their relationship, being strictly business, but you can't help but make.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, I cut you off.
Yeah, you can't help but make it personal, through the experiences that they have.
That's actually a very adequate way to put it, the way you just said it. The way how to them it's just business, but you can't be together that long without it being personal in some way. And another thing, it links to Cowboy Bebop, is Samurai Champloo, which is another one of my favorite shows. And I like Bebop more, but I think those two shows are very interesting because I view them as polar opposites. And this could be me projecting, but to me, Cowboy Bebop is a futuristic show with old soul characters. Even if they're relatively young, they have this kind of old soul kind of vibe to them. Like they've already lived almost full lives. Like Spike and Faye, they're in their 20s, but life has already just kind of chewed them up and spit them out. Jet, he may be only in his 30s. Same thing though. Ed is just too bright and optimistic and bouncing off the wall for that to even register. You get to Samurai Champloo, it's not in the future, it's in the past, but they're young soul characters. And even though say Jin is the one who is a little bit more old-fashioned and reserved, he still has a little bit of youthfulness to him. He still has a little bit more of like he still can be a little brash in some ways. So to me, though, it's just kind of interesting to me. That dynamic seems like set in the future with old soul characters and has kind of a retro vibe. And then Samurai Champloo is set in the past, but has kind of a modern vibe with young soul characters.
Yeah, it's those contrasts I think that make those stories so interesting as a viewer. Because aesthetically, you see one setting, either the sci-fi or the medieval, Japanese, and you expect certain things going into that, but then the music throws you off, the dialogue, the way the characters talk or interact with each other, it doesn't match the setting, and on purpose. And I think that's what makes it so fun to watch.
It's kind of like, and this is by no means an anime, but Samurai Champloo, it's kind of like the samurai version of like Young Guns, where it's sort of like it has this new fresh vibe, even though it's a western, so it's kind of like, oh, even though it's a samurai thing, it has this young kind of like youthful kind of vibe to it, and feels very hip and stylish, but in a way where it doesn't feel like, every so often you get that, like the only thing about Young Guns, even though it may date it, it's kind of like the 80s guitar that kind of comes in some point where you're a little bit like, that shows when this came out, aside from Emilio Estevez and Charlie Sheen. But everything else though, like this could still fit, the story wise, this could still very much fit and like still holds up. And I think Samurai Champloo is the same thing. I mean, you may have the hip hop music or the hip hop beat, and even the way they talk, they may not talk how they do regularly, but it's still like there's the one thing that just, it's weird. It's weird. This is the thing that throws me off. At some point when they go back to Mugen's Island, and he faces off against like an old rival of his, the guy has like an old school revolver, which is whatever. Those were around at that time, but he holds it sideways like he's a gangster and kind of has the arm hunched, or like angled constantly. That's the one thing where I'm like, you're trying a little too hard. Granted, that guy dies, so it's okay.
Yeah, well, you don't expect these things to be historically accurate. It's fiction after all.
Well, it's weird. I'm not sure what you call it, but there's that episode, right? Same couple episodes. They have one of those things where it's a lady, where it's like that very, it's a shimei song, and it's a lady singing in that very. I'm not trying to make fun of it, but it's like that lingering, yeah, 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 that very long lingering where it's almost telling like a story straightforward. And he's having this flashback. And it's this very, what I assume to be a very traditional Japanese thing. In that same episode, though, you got the guy like, yo, what's up, man? What's up? Holding the gun sideways. Like, all right, a little out of place, but it's nothing to grade the series down. That's the one thing. And then, like, the first episode or two, they do the thing where it's like a record skipping when they have a transition that whoop, 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 like it has a character like going back and forth, like a record skip thing. But I think that they're like, that's going to get old. Just the first two episodes, we'll call it good.
Yeah, that's a style choice, definitely. And either you love it or you hate it, but that's what gives it the identity. That's what makes that show or that series, what it is.
I think that's in Black Lagoon, which is heavily Tarantino kind of inspired kind of thing. which is like, about just modern day mercenaries in Southeast Asia taking whatever odd job they can. And they swear like sailors and make a lot of like Western references. That one, that was the last one I think I was really, really into. There's other animes since then that have come out that I like and have checked out on Netflix or Hulu or whatever. But that was the last one. Like, okay, all right, this one I feel like was for me. But then you get other ones like there's sometimes those shows where it's like they have that you love the concepts, but then maybe it's just something else about it. Like it's too much of like the anime tropes. They're like, oh, I could do without this. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. You know what reminded me when you're talking about Samurai Champloo was a Afro Samurai.
Oh, there you go. Yeah, that was very. I feel like that was Afro Samurai was almost reactionary to Samurai Champloo, maybe.
Yeah, it had definitely that marriage, if you will, of the old samurai, aesthetic, but you mix it in a blender with modern day American black culture, hip hop music, and Samuel L. Jackson voicing the main character. So of course you got some very interesting combinations there.
I really like Afro Samurai, and that's one of those cases where it was like a marriage of like it was by an American studio and a Japanese studio, and that one because that came on Spike TV of all things. I really like Afro Samurai, and that's one where it's not the story or the writing are so good, but that's a case where the action and character design are so awesome. Like that world it takes place in, this post-apocalyptic samurai world. Like it's in the future, but there's enough of the past there. And it looks like there's some big war that happened, but people have been reverted back to swords. And just the idea of if you're the strongest guy and you get this headband, you call the shots. But if you have one of these number 2 headbands, that gives you the right to challenge him. So the person with the number 2 is constantly being challenged like every day. And that in itself is, I think, a very cool concept. And Afro himself and Ninja, like, I think both those characters are just so awesome to look at. And just the way they, plus Samuel Jackson's voicing them. So, and you got both Samuel Jacksons. You got fast-talking, shit-talking Samuel Jackson, and you got cold, quiet, calculating Samuel Jackson.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the duality there with the same voice actor is quite impressive.
And Ron Perlman doing like a cowboy ninja or whatever. Or like, no, he wasn't a ninja. He was a cowboy. Yeah, he was fighting against a cow. I don't know. Just it's that weird mix match stuff like that, which is always really cool to me.
I love Ron Perlman. He does such great voice work.
He's like, I'm gonna say it. People may say no, but shave his beard, make him go bald. I think he'd be a perfect Lex Luthor.
No, oh yeah, he would. Yeah.
I'll even go as far as like do the exact same thing to Clancy Brown, who voices Lex Luthor in the animated series. I think that works just as good too. So yeah. Sorry, you reminded me of Ron Perlman. Then I remind me of Clancy Brown. They seem like they'd probably grab a beer together. That's what popped in my head. Yeah, Afro Samurai. I remember that one, and plus that also. I mean, I already kind of knew who RZA was, but that actually got me more into his music by looking at that soundtrack, and then from there, I looked more into Wu-Tang Clan. I'm by no means like an expert on hip hop. I'm more of like rock and folk, but I'm gonna say Afro Samurai probably kind of cracked the door open for me a little bit more, and that got me more into like Wu-Tang Clan.
I love anime. I love, talking about anime, and I love making fan art of anime. But truth be told, I don't watch a whole lot of anime nowadays, and I don't know if it's just because of just life, where I'm at. I have I work, all the time. I have kids at home, and in my spare time, I just don't sit down and binge watch anime.
Yeah, I'm kind of in that same boat too now. There's like the series I will watch every so often, and I would love to watch just one of those series, just hooks me. And there are ones out there that I still really like. Two shows that were on Netflix that I liked both of. Actually, one was on Hulu, I think. Maybe it was on Netflix. I don't remember. Megalobox, which is basically set in the future, and people have like this gear robot, kind of like that suit that Matt Damon has in Elysium. This thing that gives you extra strength. People box with like something kind of like that, and this dude who kind of comes from nothing, kind of works his way up to the top, and it's kind of this very classist, elitist kind of thing he's working through, and kind of like the shady dealings you got to do in order to win and get through and get promoted. So it's kind of like a Rocky story in a quasi post-apocalyptic. It's not post-apocalyptic. I guess it's, you can tell the world's in bad shape and it's probably recovering from a war or something like that. There's still societies and there's still fancy buildings, but you can tell it's in the future. And you see a guy coming from nothing working his way up. So it's just basically a standard boxing story with a little sci-fi tinge. And I really liked that show. And then there's one called Cannon Busters, which it was on Netflix, a Netflix original, and I liked it. But it's one of those shows where, God, if only you had a little bit more of this and a little less of that. Some of the, anime cliche stuff.
Yeah, yeah. I whenever I give presentations in school and the students, and I ask them, what are some of the shows that you're watching nowadays, and I hear a lot of My Hero Academia, and Naruto, and I'll admit I have not watched any of those. I'm familiar with the characters and the stories and the premises, but I don't have the time to devote to watching those series.
I watched like the first 2 episodes of My Hero Academia, and it wasn't bad. I mean, maybe it changes as it goes on, but like I just wasn't really into it. I know, and that's sometimes the way some shows are. You need more than 2 episodes to get into. That happens sometimes. I was like that with Full Metal Alchemist. Saw the first episode and I wasn't feeling it, but as time went on, it became one of my favorite shows. I think I think the idea that like most people in the world by this point have a superpower, and a kid with no superpowers wants to become a superhero. That's an interesting concept. I don't know if he eventually finds his quirk or whatever they call it. I don't know if that eventually happens or not, or if he just learns to fight with raw strength. But regardless, I think that, it sounds like an interesting concept, and I never really got past the first 2 episodes. And it's more of like, that. It's not so much that doesn't, I just never really got into it. It's not really that I dislike. The stuff that I don't like in anime is, I guess, it's stuff that attributes to harem type things. Like, it's not solely this, but like, people were telling me to check out this Sword Art Online show. And the concept is interesting. The idea that some evil tech billionaire puts out this VR game, and if anybody takes the VR headset off you, you die. It sends an electrical shock. So you got people stuck in this game until they win. That's an interesting concept. But the main character is so, like, I don't know. I mean, I guess the boy, I'm not sure if you just call a Mary Sue guy, if there's another word for it, but just kind of like so overpowered. Everything happens for him so easily. Girls coming out of nowhere just fall over the guy. And it's just like, when I see a character who he just seems like a blank slate, and it just, I don't know, there's just so many moments where it's just like, let me tell you what to do. We gotta, I'm a beta tester. That's how I know. It's just like, I don't give a shit about this kid.
What bothers me in a lot of those harem animes is when you have a love interest, or oftentimes more than one, and the protagonist, the male, I feel like it makes me upset when he's not worthy of it. Like he did nothing to earn the affection of these incredibly attractive women in his life, and it's just that's not the way relationships work. You have to work at it, you have to earn it, and you have to be a respectable person. You have to have good character. You have to woo and impress your mate. And so often the main character is a bumbling idiot. He's clumsy, he's not very likable, and yet the women find him so endearing, and at first it comes across as like pity. They pity him, and so they're nice to him, but then they fall for him, and it gets me every time.
it gets that's always one of those things, like if I see like the signs of that when I was like probably 14 or whatever, I'm just like, why don't I have a girlfriend yet? And then I see that, I'm like, this show gets it, you know. But then like you get older and you get into actual relationships, and I guess that's always a little bit of a wall. You gotta either kind of like, all right, well I reached this wall, I either gotta just plow through it and hope the show gets better, or just like, nah, not feeling like it, and turn it off. Um, there was a show that I watched like the first episode of. It was called something to the effect of like it's not nice, it's not right, or not a good idea to pick up girls in a dungeon or something. And I was like, okay, whatever. It's Let me see what this is all about. And I kind of got the idea it might be sort of a harem just from the name, but it's in this world, this sci-fi or this fantasy world where it's literally laid out like a RPG. They're even naming off stats and levels and classes as if it's just part of the world. And you have to change in your experience to certain areas to get the next upgrade. I'm like, that's kind of interesting. All right, but the thing is, people I guess are fighting for like a god or a goddess, and they have one. He has like this low level tier goddess he's fighting for, and she's just head over heels in love with him, basically just hanging out in the house in lingerie, and they share the same bed, and she's like just snuggling up with him like, oh, Cujo-san or whatever, I don't fucking know. And her boobs are in his face like, duh, and then he's like, I'm sorry, but there's this other girl I like, and he can't put together that this girl is like head over heels for him. And I'm just like, I can't, and he's just always, like you said, just a bumbling idiot. And I don't know, maybe that's just the thing. Maybe we're just coming in here with our prejudice and our Western sensibilities. Maybe that's a very common thing in Japan. Maybe it's like, how'd you and mom meet? I don't know. We were in a spring one day. I accidentally walked into the wrong one. I fell over. My hand hit her tit. I got a random nosebleed. She smacked me until I went into the sky, did the Team Rocket thing, and then 3 months later we got married.
Yeah, that of course. That's how it works. I mean, I'm still waiting for that to happen to me.
Yeah, maybe we gotta go to Japan. Maybe it's way more common there. Maybe it's like, you clearly don't know how things work over here. Like, oh, that's how it works? Okay, shit. I imagine that they probably also... I could also see a lot of, like, people... I could see Japanese people getting really irritated that people assume that's what it's like in Japan. Like, got all these Americans coming by thinking everyone's going to act like an anime character.
No, I know. But there's also the other trope, right? Where you have this schoolyard crush or the neighbor next door, and you haven't confessed your feelings, and it's like a big decision, a big moment. It's like the hardest thing you've ever done in your life, and that is treated with such reverence, confessing. And that's very different than how we do it here in the States. And here in the States, it's like, oh, hey, you want to go out for lunch? Sure. Yeah, I like you. I like you too. Hey, let's go hang out. It's very casual. It's low risk. But in Japan, it's like life or death. You put yourself out there, and it's if you get rejected, it's like the end of the world.
Probably depends on your genre. If it's a romance genre, definitely the end of the world.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
I remember watching this. I was curious about it, and I liked it, and I felt I had mixed feelings on it by the time it was over, but because I guess I was trying to condense a whole series into one movie. There's I think I'm trying to know. There's two different names for it. I want to say the Japanese name might be A Silent Voice, and then the American name might be something else. I don't remember, but it was on Netflix, and I watched it. And it was more of a slice of life kind of movie. And it was this movie about this kid who bullied this poor deaf girl so bad to like just a horrific level. And he was almost kind of being egged on by his friends. You see, like, the beginning of the first 20 or 30 minutes of this movie is this shitty little kid just being horrible to this deaf girl. And they're in elementary school. And then one day he goes so far, he's kind of ostracized. And he's almost like ostracized from everybody else. And that almost kind of gives him this weird anxiety. And he's almost like he has no self-esteem. He has nothing, kind of like he has no like guts because he's just so guilt ridden. And then years later, we're in like high school or something like that, and he's meeting the girl again for the first time, and he's trying to make up for it, and then people are starting to come together, and that aspect it's really good. But the only problem with that one is it does the thing where it explains relationships a lot, but then where they explain like a lot of exposition. But then it does this thing where I'm guessing because they're trying to condense a whole series into one movie, where everybody has to weigh in. Everybody comes in, and everybody's almost kind of rooting for this couple as if they have nothing else to do with in their lives. You know what I mean? Like so many people are just like by themselves talking about what do you think is going to happen with that? I hope it works out between them. This and that. Oh wow, they'd be a cute couple. Whatever, and that's lingering over them so much. Just like, don't you guys have anything else to do other than talk about this potential couple over here?
It's called vicarious living. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's very much like that. So, and I still overall liked the movie, but it was that was kind of there. I'm like, all right, you could have got rid of like half these side characters and probably would have been moved along a little smoother. But regardless, I think it's just a thing of the trope. Even like there's a show that I watched called High Score Girl, which was funny, and it was a little bit of a romance one, which was set in the 90s about this kid who's socially awkward and who's really good at video games, especially Street Fighter 2. And they have all these deep cut references and things apparently only people in competitive scenes really know about, because things I didn't even know about. And the kid's kind of an asshole. He's a little mouthy, and this is kind of the one thing he's good at. But then he meets this girl who can beat him, and the girl's like a mute, and she comes from a rich family. And it's kind of like their relationship he has with her. Eventually another girl comes in and wants to be with him. And that's what the other girl, that's where they kind of force this thing of, like, he did nothing to get this girl's attention, but she's suddenly smitten by him, and her whole existence relies on getting his approval. So that's why she starts playing video games a lot. So sometimes that kind of stuff. I still liked the show, but sometimes that kind of stuff always just stands out to me. Like, and he has this friend that's always looming in over his shoulder saying, you should go for that girl, man. You should go for that girl. Man, why can't that guy go for that girl? Like, why don't you go after the girl yourself? You seem so, like, infatuated with her. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I get kind of concerned on some of the messaging that comes across when it comes to relationships like that. And there's a lot of obsession. And I think, it works for the shows, sure, but take it in real life, transition it, to, people, and it's unhealthy. You get those characters that are, wanting to change themselves so much and sacrifice so much to earn the love of someone who doesn't even give them the time of day.
And it's always at a really formidable age, like something around like 14, 18.
Yeah, and it gets shown in such a way where it's heroic. It's like good on them for trying. It's almost glorified. In the attempt. And I'm just thinking, oh boy, like that's gonna cause a whole lot of mental problems and emotional problems for a real person. To try so hard, to earn the love of someone, and even if at the end of the series, they miraculously get together. I just can't help but think that, like, I'm not rooting for them because, one person put in so much effort while the other didn't, that they're not going to really value that person. They're not going to show them the amount of appreciation they deserve. It's unfair. It's an unbalanced relationship. And then you have the other trope where you have, like, I guess a love triangle, and one person, is obviously in love with another, and then you have the side character who is sacrificially supporting them in the background like a cheerleader, and they'll say something along the lines of, as long as you're happy, then I find my happiness in that, and that's all I need, or just to be your friend is enough. Even though clearly they want to, be more than friends, they're giving up so much and it's shown in a heroic and sacrificial way, but I can't help but think that they're just compromising, they're giving up. It's really like a defeatist attitude. It's like, okay, you deserve someone who appreciates you. You got to go out there and you got to fight for them, or you got to find someone who will, not take you for granted. I mean, everybody deserves love. Everybody deserves to find someone. Living your whole life in the background, acting as a cheerleader, rooting on for this other person that you love deep down in your heart, who you feel is your soulmate, but you've made the choice not to be with them because they're in love with somebody else. In real life, that is unhealthy. That is damaging.
Yeah.
That is not the example that you should be striving for.
May sound like a good idea at the moment, but like 6 months in, being on the third wheel on the date again, that's probably going to do a little damage to your mind after a while. Just after a while, like, hey guys, I know we're staring at the moon, the three of us, the cherry blossoms going by again, but can we do something else? Because I feel like this is more of a you guys thing. After a while, that's probably going to get to one of those characters.
Yeah, I mean, being supportive, that's great. But for that person, that third wheel, like, the healthy thing to do is to move on and to have a healthy amount of self-esteem. That your identity and your worth and your value as a character, as a person, is independent on the object of your affection, and you need to find something else, some other purpose in your life other than to obsess over something you're never going to have.
And I guess it's one of those things. It's not like taking actual offense to anything like that, at least for me. But it's just like some weird, clunky. It might just be a cultural difference. But I honestly don't see most people doing that. Really, maybe they do, but I honestly don't see most people actually doing that. And I guess that's the thing about a lot of anime. Even though there's probably some animes that I even like that do that, but I guess I feel like I see people who see a lot of I feel like God, I don't want to be one of those people. Change it because it doesn't fit our Western sensibilities. But I don't want it to be that way. But I could almost see people, just kind of young people, seeing anime at a young age, just almost telling you what you want to hear rather than what you need to hear. And that doesn't strictly apply to anime. It could apply to anything, really, if you look at it long enough. But I guess just that idea of like, you're just fine just the way you are, and you don't have to, just girls will immediately like you for no reason. Really? Yeah. So.
Yeah. Oh, those power fantasies, those being a young boy and just wanting all the attention of all the females, and of course it's undeserved, unearned. It just kind of happens to you by chance. So either you're lucky or you're not, unless you're the chosen one. Then you don't have, nothing you did is out of your control. It's almost like it's destiny, and of course, a lot of young boys just, we're all the main character of our own stories, right? Mm-hmm. We all think of ourselves as the protagonist, so we put ourselves in the shoes of those characters that we watch in those animes, and then we wonder, hey, when am I going to get mine? When am I going to experience this or something remotely like it? And I mean, I'll admit, I kind of had false expectations as a preteen, and of course, none of that comes to fruition. And now I know better.
I'm thinking back on without going too much into it, there's like this science fiction story that I have now that I'm working on the comic for it, and it's been taking a long time to put out, mainly just because just life, just work and all that. And I've been working on this thing for a while. There are earlier versions of it back in high school, and I'm thinking back early high school, like freshman and sophomore year, when I watched a lot, and I mean a lot of anime. And I'm thinking about the relationships I had some of the characters in, and I'm thinking no, that's not how it works in real life. Not how it works at all. Just the whole thing of main character just getting, just here's a platter of pussy, take your pick, So no, it doesn't. So now it's almost like I'm so glad, when you're younger, you're thinking like, man, if I could just get this published, get this happen. I'm so glad I was too lazy to send that in to anybody. Just get so like, yeah. But I think it does kind of. I think that's anything though. I don't think that's strictly an anime thing. Creating false expectations of. I mean, romantic comedies. American romantic comedies are horrible about that.
Oh yeah,
So
yeah, I agree
just
there.
the other way on it. But regardless, still like anime, but there's yet to be the one since probably Black Lagoon or Cowboy Bebop or Wolf's Rain that I've just been full on like, oh my god, this is one of my favorite shows. But it also might just be a thing of like you kind of maybe had to grow up with it, and that's why it's such a special place. I think I'd like Cowboy Bebop now because that is about people who have had more life experience, and I think a lot of the anime that at least comes to America is shonen-esque stuff.
Yeah, whatever sells merchandise, whatever sells the video games, you know. We're capitalist America, so that's what determines the success of an anime or not here in the States, is whether or not it can make money.
Well, that's kind of the funny thing because I remember I have a Cowboy Bebop wallet, and it was interesting. I used to work at this bike job, and I would have to ask people for ID or a credit card so they can go rent this bike. And I had a Japanese customer one time, and I was trying to tell him I need your ID, and he was having trouble understanding. So I pulled out my wallet to show my driver's license. Like, I need this, and he saw it was a Cowboy Bebop wallet. He's like, Bebopo. He's like, what? Kobe Bebopo. I'm like, oh, Bebop, right on, man. He's like, da 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 da. You did the hum thing, and I did it back to him. Like, all right, cool. All right, I'm giving you a discount. So, so there's that thing. But then, like, I talked to somebody else who went to Japan recently, and it's kind of funny because he was talking to somebody there, and now here in the U.S., it's looked at very fondly and remembered very much, and over there, it's done. It's done, and it's people may have liked it, but it's over with. And it's one of these things where it's like they're surprised that show is still so popular over here because now it's having this big resurgence because people our age who grew up with it in high school are now buying T-shirts and buying mashup shirts of it and all that kind of stuff. And now it's like this thing coming back. It's kind of like you find out like apparently Snoopy is huge in Japan. They love Snoopy over there. Like, really, him? It's kind of like Brazil. Woody Woodpecker's massive over there for some reason. So Bebop is just one of those random things that we haven't let go of yet over here.
Yeah. Yeah, so, you brought up an interesting point how, Toonami, right? Early 90s, late 90s, early 2000s, and we were, middle school, high school age, and now we're adults. We have fond memories of these shows, and we have jobs, we have money, and we're gonna buy merchandise on all the things that we love. We've been doing it for American comics and American shows and stuff, and anime is no exception.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I think now, because I feel like people are viewing it as a phase. Like, this is something that's gonna fall, because I think a lot of older generations were running toy companies and merchandise companies at the time. Probably like, this is a phase. They'll be over it. In some cases, that's the truth, but Pokemon is still here, and Pokemon's stronger than ever. And not just because, there's a constant new generations coming in and jumping onto it, but there's people like us who are Generation 1. I mean, my girlfriend and I were getting ready to move pretty soon. We went to IKEA. I saw 3 adults around our own age wearing Generation 1 Pokemon shirts. So, that in itself, maybe there is that period where like, oh, people talk shit on me if I like it at this age, but then eventually that goes away. You're like, I don't care.
Yeah. What is this, high school? No. Yeah, we don't have to worry about peer pressure like we used to.
Granted, that wasn't like an opening line on our first date. Like, what's your favorite Pokemon game? But still, there's a time and place for it,
Yeah, times are changing. Anime and comics and superheroes and video games, they were taboo. They were, a small segment of the population. But now, the box office, has proven that superhero movies make way more money than anything else. And they're changing the way that we view cinema. And
Marvel Endgame was like people who only saw 1 or 2 Marvel movies at that point went to go see Endgame just because it was the big thing to go see, and they were crying at the end of it. So, yeah.
Yeah, it sank the Titanic.
Yes.
And mind you, the Titanic was an Emmy Award-winning movie. You know, I don't know if we're at that point yet where we're going to see a bunch of Grammys and Emmys for Marvel movies.
We're gonna have to. I mean, they gave Black Panther they gave that one like maybe you have a chance. Like we all knew it wasn't gonna win, but they threw it out there. But I think give it time. Right now, you still got a bunch of old people like this is not cinema. And every time a Marvel movie, you get the Marvel movies that come out that do good, and then you get the Marvel movies that come out that everyone just loves. And whenever one of those ones comes out, someone from old Hollywood comes out and it's like, this is not cinema. This is, and I'm not trying to like, I'm not going to give Scorsese crap for not liking a Marvel movie because you look at his movies, it's obvious he doesn't like Marvel movies. But someone like a Scorsese or a Coppola or Mel Gibson or Judy Foster comes out and starts talking about like, this is not real cinema. It's just like, no, it's just a new type of cinema. I mean, Westerns were huge for a long time. Those got ran into the ground. Things you guys were doing for a long time, we've seen them a bunch of times. Those are beginning to get ran into the ground. So don't get me wrong, I'll still see a Scorsese movie. I still love Scorsese, even though I think that was a stupid statement. I mean, Departed is one of my favorite movies of all time. So yeah.
Yeah. So I think what this is doing is in the public eye having approval for superheroes leads to comics. Comics then of course is just the cousin of manga, and manga then therefore anime. So I think that it's kind of all coming to this point where it's becoming more socially acceptable, especially now than it was, say, 20 years ago. And I can only imagine it being more the case as time goes on.
That, and you even have shows that like people who don't usually like anime were watching. Like there's on Netflix, there's that show Agretzko, which just looks like it almost looks like a kid's show. But it's about being in your 20s, working a corporate office job you hate, and just kind of wondering where's your life taking you. So this cute little fox character goes and sings death metal at a karaoke club by herself to vent. So it's one of those things where it has some of those really anime-ish tropes, but there's something deeper at the end of the day. And that was one where I remember back before I actually met my current girlfriend, I was on a date with this other girl, and she's like, you know what? I started watching that show, and I don't like anime, but I really like that one. That one was really speaking to me. And it was one of those things where, yeah, those shows there's more to them than just robots fighting,
Mm-hmm. One of the things that I love about anime that makes it so different than Western cartoons is the fact that they're not serialized. They are serialized. They're not episodic. So you're rewarded for sticking around. You grow an appreciation for the characters when they die, when they hook up, when they win, when they lose. As a viewer, you feel it, and like soap operas. Like the people who watch soap operas, they become so invested in, and those giant fandoms, and they're really serious about it. You get very same reactions out of those who watch anime for their favorite anime. It becomes more than just, oh yeah, I like to watch that. Like you get some super serious fans. They dress as the character, they do cosplay, they do fan art, they buy the toys, and it becomes a part of their life. It gets like Star Wars and Star Trek. You get these huge groups of fans, and anime has that ability to capture that because there's so much reward for the investment. They're not just two-dimensional characters, having adventures every Saturday. There's growth, there's change, there's some I love the animes where time actually progresses. You see the characters grow, they age, and they get married or they have kids. I love seeing that, and as a viewer it makes sense. Like Dragon Ball, for instance. You start out with Goku as a youngin, and then you see him grow up, you see him settle down, he has kids, his kids grow up, And so me now as a parent, I was watching the entire Dragon Ball series, the original, Z, and GT, and Super, with my children. It took us about 2 years to get through all that. And it was such a different experience watching it now as a parent and getting to see my children's reaction and their favorite characters and the things that they loved about it, the things that they were confused and I had to answer questions for. And it was a family bonding experience. And so now my family and I, we're all Dragon Ball fans, but I've been a Dragon Ball fan most of my life. And so it was something special being able to share that with my kids. And now, like, watching, I can legitimately tell you that Goku is the worst father in the entirety of the world.
Oh, he is.
Goku fails at parenthood. And Gohan is the best.
He is the worst father ever. Just like, even Team 4-Star, when they make that joke, like, what would my dad do right now? Bye, son!
or that one where, I don't think it was Team 4-Star, but, Jiren is fighting Goku and beating the hell out of him. And Gohan takes his Sensu Bean and gives it to Jiren. And he says, how do you like it now? Do you remember when I fought Cell? And Goku's like, oh yeah, I did do that, didn't I? Yeah, how do you like it now?
Well, I like they at least call some things out. Because even like, because we're wrapping it up here, but I'll say, even like the newer Dragon Ball stuff, they found ways to, like, I didn't see Super, but there are things they did in the movies leading up to Super and in Super Broly where they kind of like add a little bit more to it. Like Frieza in Resurrection F, he's all like, oh, well, I was just born naturally this strong, but if I actually trained, I could probably become stronger than Cell or even Majin Buu.
Yeah, that was a...
They came up with excuses for things. And you said they made Krillin more the tactician of the group, right?
Yeah, when they were recruiting him for the Tournament of Power, everyone was like, why? And so Goku had a sparring match with Krillin, and Krillin obviously was, not even stood a chance when it comes to raw power. But the Tournament of Power has, it's not a death match. It's a ring out. And so so Krillin was able to ring out Goku and therefore become recruited for the Tournament of Power.
Yeah, so it's like they kind of like look... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, using his wits and good battle strategy.
That's one of the reasons I want to check out Super. I saw the movie, the Broly movie, but I want to check out Super just because it sounds like all these flaws and things that were in the original show, or it looks like they're coming up with answers for him now in this one.
Yeah, one of my favorite lines is Piccolo explaining why Goku and Chi-Chi are such a good match for each other. Oh, no, it was Vegeta. Vegeta was the one who said it. And Vegeta basically said that Saiyans are strong-willed people, and they are attracted to strong-willed women.
Ah.
And Piccolo is dumbfounded, and he's like, after all these years, it suddenly makes sense. Why does Goku put up with all of that? It's because deep down inside, he's wired that way.
He loves conflict.
It doesn't bother him. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why Vegeta and Bulma work so well, too. They're both strong-willed people. And sure, they fight all the time, but they also have such deep loyalty for each other.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, I have to check out Super. I'm really, I'm getting nostalgic for that show, so I got to check out the new one. But anyway, I feel like that's probably a good place to cap this off at. Is there any last comments you'd like to make at all?
I really should watch more anime.
I guess I'll say I need to watch Super, and I'm not that I'm like, it sounded maybe like I was dismissing anime. I'm not being dismissive of it. There's the shows I really grew up on and really love. I'm just yet to find that thing I like as much as, like I said, I really liked Cannon Busters and Megalobox, but I'm just looking for that thing that's like the next Bebop to me, which, who knows, I saw it at a very particular time in my life, so maybe it's hard to find that particular thing again. But regardless, yeah, just thought it'd be fun to talk about anime, just how we got into it, our opinions on it, all that kind of stuff. Hopefully it was fun for you folks to listen to. James, anything you'd like to plug before we go?
Yeah, this might be a controversial topic, but one of my favorite animes is not an anime at all, but some people would make the argument against it. But Avatar: The Last Airbender is one of my favorite shows of all time. Whether it's an anime or not, you know, you're gonna have people on both sides of that argument. Have you watched that?
It's a show I remember you talking about, and I watched a couple episodes one time when you were visiting, and I saw a few episodes later with my nephews and liked it. I just recently started watching it on Netflix since it's on there, and I like everything so far. It's very well thought out, the world it takes place in, all the fine details between the different cultures and all that.
Mm-hmm. When you finish that series, let me know, because I would love to talk about that.
Definitely, I'd be up for that, yeah. Anyway, folks, I think that's a good place to wrap it up on. Our sign-off cut off a little early right there for some reason. I don't know why. But let me just handle all the housekeeping real quick. As usual, our opening and closing music is Them Strangers. You can find them on YouTube, as well as somewhere on the Old Man Orange YouTube page. If you like to find James's artwork, you can go to jamesartville.com. He also has an Instagram. I have an Instagram too. Mine is Grit5. I also have a Twitter at Dunnigan Ryan, but real talk, I haven't really been on my Twitter in a while. I'm gonna have to get back on that game eventually. But anyway, pretty soon this will be moving over to its own channel and won't be popping up on the Old Man Orange feed anymore. But these first couple episodes will. Anyway, just keep an eye out for that. I'll let the next episode know, or an Old Man Orange, when it is on its own channel. Anyway, until then, y'all take care. Bye.
Hope you enjoyed that brand new episode of Octorok Talk. Look for more zany fun at oldmanorange.com for more podcasts, comic books, cartoons, and all that other fun stuff.